Again, we're going to do 10 minutes. Okay, here we go. 2263, Slomka. Good luck. All right, so as we've already established, I'm playing my main repertoire, and we're facing c3. So in the previous Alapin game, which we played, I think I went for d6. But here I'm going to go for my sort of official black recommendation against the Alapin, which is d5 and knight f6, which our opponent, I guess, was not expecting because he pre-moved d4. Here, the move is c takes d4. And our opponent is immediately funneling the game into what structure? What is the structure that our opponent funnels the game into? It is the IQP. It's the IQP, isolated queen pawn. Now, is it a good version for white? Not particularly, because we already have a blockading knight on t5, which is the kind of dream scenario. So it's an IQP, but it's a really good version for black as we continue to develop, because we have this blockading knight on t5. Is black much better? No. In fact, after knight c3, this is likely to transpose into mainline Caro-Kann theory. But nonetheless, it's a pleasant position. Okay, so bishop g4 would transpose into a very well-known line of the Caro-Kann, where white plays queen b3, and the situation liquidates into an equal endgame. So we could play bishop g4. Of course, after bishop g4, we also could meet bishop e2. We could play e6 in order to keep more pieces on the board. We could even play g6, which is also entirely possible. Let me think about this. g6, I don't know much about this move, actually. Yeah, bishop g4 is theory. e6 is possible. I'm going to go e6. I'm going to try to keep the purity of the IQP. I'm going to go e6. Just to avoid the drawish line. Bishop g4, queen b3 is not a forced draw, but it's a forced exchange of a lot of pieces, and it's a drawish resulting endgame. So we're going to continue our kingside development, bishop e7. And we can castle. So we have completed our kingside development. The only issue, if you can call it that, is the bishop on c8. And typically in IQP structures, it is fianchettoed on b7. Now, one very weird thing that you might see. First of all, white can play knight takes d5 at any moment. He doesn't. One very weird thing that you will see in a lot of IQP games is this move, knight d5 back to f6. Why is this move weird? Well, because isn't the whole point, you might be wondering, of playing against the IQP to blockade the pawn? And it's a little bit hard for me to explain during the game, so I'll give you some more logic after the game. But the basic idea is the d4 pawn shouldn't only be blockaded. It should also be attacked. And in the name of attacking it, we can play a move that's even more aggressive than knight f6, opening up an attack on the pawn, but also hitting another piece. What are we talking about here? It's a risky move, but I like it. I like this move. It's the move knight d to b4, which has to be seriously contemplated. Knight d to b4. It's a risky move, but knight f6 is the safe option. And knight f6 is the move that's more textbooky, kind of. It's more textbooky. Okay, let's give it a shot. No Greek gift sacrifice because g5 is protected. We have a bishop here, so there will never be any kind of Greek gift. Now, what am I trying to do with this move? Well, first of all, I'm attacking the d4 pawn, but I'm also trying to go after the light squared bishop. Why is it important to go after the light squared bishop? Because this is the main vehicle, the main tool that white uses in initiating the kingside attack. And in IQP structures, white's bread is buttered on the kingside. If we can eliminate this bishop, we eliminate the possibility of a battery against the h7 pawn, which means that we can keep our pawn structure entirely intact, which means that white's attack is not going to get off the ground without this bishop. So white now has to decide between giving this bishop away, big positional concession, or giving away the IQP, which is obviously risky from white's point of view as well as ours. So that's the basic logic here. This is why in IQP structures, you will often see white playing the move a3 sooner rather than later. And it's partially to avoid this knight b4 knight sally. Okay, so let's see what is our opponent's response. And it's bishop e4. I think this is the best move. Well, as the expression goes, having said A, we have to say B. Or do we? as some of you are pointing out, we can play knight takes d4, and we get into this incredibly complex position where the queen can get kind of tossed around. And it's a little bit iffy, if you ask me. But we can also throw in a really nice little move to chase this bishop away and to pose white with another dilemma. And I'm talking about the move f5. And you might look at this move and you say, well, I get it. We want to go after this bishop, but aren't we very seriously weakening the e6 pawn? We are, right? There's no arguing with that. But if white trades on c6, then white will not be able to attack it effectively, and it's going to be nicely protected by the light squared bishop. Yes, the e6 pawn is now a drawback of our position, but as you get higher and higher rated, you need to move away from this way of thinking where you kind of reason categorically, like, oh, this move contains a drawback, therefore I'm not going to play it. That's the kind of reasoning that's going to limit you and prevent your progression. A lot of times you need to make a move that, yes, it has a drawback, but its strengths outweigh its drawbacks. And this, I think, is the case with f5. Okay, so we can play bc in order to really, increase our blockade on d5. But I'm not really worried about white pushing the pawn just yet, or am I? bc is a very serious idea, by the way. So much so that I'm leaning in the direction of bc. I'm leaning in, yeah, let's go bc. Let's go bc. It also insinuates bishop a6, although that's not a threat, as you should see, because queen takes e6 is a check. But bishop a6 is not a threat, but it might be in the long run. Like once that we protect this pawn, bishop a6 might become a possibility. Now, our pawn structure is bad. There's no denying that. But we have compensatory factors. We have the bishop pair. We have now a complete blockade over the IQP, which will remain a weakness for the foreseeable future. And we have the prospects of getting this bishop out to an active square. Okay, a3, obviously we go knight d5. So again, make sure that you understand bishop a6 runs into queen takes e6 check. We have no choice but to come back to the blockading square. Let's see what our opponent comes up with here. Queen c4. Okay. It's not a very scary move. It hits the c6 pawn, so we definitely would like to defend this pawn. What is on the menu here? Well, we can defend it with the bishop b7, but I would like to avoid bishop b7 if possible, because not only does it put the bishop on a closed diagonal, but the e6 pawn can then be targeted with a move like rook e1. So I'd like to defend this pawn with the queen, and by playing queen b6, the additional benefit is that bishop a6 now is a threat. So it's both an attacking move and a defensive move. Queen b6 is a no-brainer and should be too. Should be a no-brainer too. Now bishop a6 is an actual threat. It wins material. So white should play rook e1. But that doesn't mean we won't play bishop a6. We'll consider that move anyway. But notice that the bishop on c8 is not a terrible piece because it is guarding the very important pawn on e6. The saying goes, I think it was coined by this Romanian grandmaster, that bad bishops defend good pawns. Sometimes bad bishops defend bad pawns, but sometimes bad pawns can be very important to the health of your position. Rook e1, good job by our opponent. So bishop a6 hits the queen. The queen doesn't have a lot of squares, but it does have a2, which is quite annoying. And then we're going to have to deal with the e6 pawn again. So I would prefer to make a different improving move. Well, what's available to us? What pieces can we improve? Well, looking around the board, I'm looking at the bishop on e7, and I'm noticing that we can position it on f6 in order to increase the pressure on d4 and also getting the bishop out of the rook's x-ray. I don't like bishop d7 because it runs into knight e5, and the bishop on d7 looks hella awkward. So let's go bishop f6, just keeping the tension. Yeah, this is the last game. I'm running on fumes here. For those watching on YouTube, this is 6.5 hour stream now. But this is the final game. So enjoy it while it lasts. Whew. Knight a4. Clearly our opponent is going to c5. But what squares are given up by the knight when it moves from c3 to a4? Well, the b5 square, I think, is the juiciest one that we can sink our queen onto. It's a juicy move because if the queens are traded, then we correct our pawn structure. Our pawns visit the orthodontist. And we can then protect the e6 pawn with rook e8. I think black has the edge in the endgame after the trade. After the trade, I think black has the edge. A very mature move is queen c2. That's what I would play. But Slomka trades and hits the pawn on e6, which we should defend. Should we defend it perhaps with our king? Maybe. But again, that runs into knight e5 check. I think that we should defend it with our rook. I would also, at this point, consider sacrificing the pawn to free up our other pieces. But I think it's a little bit early for that. I don't see a drawback to the move rook e8. And we are cramped here because of this knight on c5, but we're going to try to find ways to work around it. And we're going to try to find ways to continue improving our position, even though this knight is hanging over our position like the sword of Damocles. I like black's position here, even though it may not look appealing to you. Bishop d2, okay. Man, I would kill to put a bishop on b7, but we can't do that just yet. Here's what I want to do. I would like to activate the a8 rook. And we can do it through b8. And then b6. And the additional benefit of that is, well, there's two. First of all, when we get the rook to b6, we're overprotecting the e6 pawn. And second of all, maybe later on we can push b4 and open up the queen side a little bit. So it's a good multi-purpose move. No, I amend my assessment. I think the position is equal. But the situation gets to time pressure phase now. Rook e2, so our opponent clearly piling up on the pawn. Well, that's even more of a reason for us to play rook b6. But we don't necessarily have to rush with that move. And one alternate way that we can actually defend is we can play the move h6 to prevent various knight g5 shenanigans. And then we could play king f7. But then again, it runs into knight e5. And what I'm trying to avoid is an opposite colored bishop endgame. I'm trying to avoid the trade on e5 because that position would be a little bit too drawish for my taste. I think that position would be very close to a draw. So let's go rook b6, overprotecting the pawn. Let's not do that. Yeah, let's not draw. Let's try to win. But if white plays well, this is a draw. I don't think that we can win this position against best play. I was also dealing with bishop a5 for a while. But bishop a5, I think we go rook d6. Okay, h4, we're quickly going to go h6 to protect the g5 square. And I'm playing this move without thinking because clearly it keeps the status quo. The rook from b6 does not have to move to c6. It can also move over to d6, closer to the center. And everything's nicely protected here. Good position for black. Yeah, of course, white can play h5, but remember, if white pushes the pawn to h5, that's a long-term weakness. Like, you never know when in some knight endgame we'll be able to pick that pawn off, so it's a very committal move. Rook e1. Yeah, I have to commend our opponent. He's playing very high-quality chess. I think this is a really good game in general by both of us so far. Okay, so we're going to complete the rook lift with rook d6. And another reason I'm putting the rook on d6 is I'm trying to preempt the move knight e5. Now, if white plays knight e5, the d4 pawn is going to be x-rayed, and we can potentially drop our knight back and hit the pawn directly. g3. Okay. Now we really, really need to find a way to work around this knight. Let me think about this. I'm liking the look of knight b6, actually. Sort of. Maybe it's time to play king f7 and bite the bullet. I think it is. I think we should go king f7. And this is not a draw offer, by the way. I think that the situation has subtly changed after knight e5 check, and I actually think that black in the resulting position has some meat on the bone there after knight e5 check, which I'm expecting. I think knight e5 is pretty much automatic. We're also keeping an eye on the clock. Knight d3. Okay, but that is a huge concession. I think our opponent is leading the knight to e5, but finally the embargo has been lifted at last. And we do not need to be asked twice. Let's get this bishop out to b7, completing our development. And if white says, okay, never mind, let's go back to c5. No, we're not going to go back to c8. We're going to go back to a8. And that's partially why we played king f7. Okay, so here, there's no need to take the knight. We just drop back. And now we're starting to outplay our opponent. Okay, yeah, I'll bend the guy. Okay, knight c5, and there we go. We're not going bishop c8 and forgiving white for, this untoward move. We're going to go bishop a8. And now our bishop is very smugly sitting on the long diagonal. Bishop c3. Okay. The next stage is to start directly attacking some of white's weaknesses here. We can also expand on the king side with g5, which is a really attractive idea to me, actually. I like the look of g5. I'm actually thinking about checkmate already. I'm thinking about checkmate. I know that sounds crazy, but if white trades on g5, I think white's king might be in very big trouble in the long run here. Knight d7. Okay, I didn't see that move. But what does it do? Oh, it hits e6 like this. Okay, so we should definitely protect e6. We should go king f7 here, which is also part of the plan. So king f7 is a move that I would have played anywhere, king g7. Does anybody see what I'm trying to set up here with this bishop? Yeah, endgame checkmate, rook h8 potentially. Now it might be time for us to take. Let me think. There's some calculation already to do. No, let's go king g7. And let's try to set up some tactics already. Oh my gosh. Oh, there's something juicy here. There's some juicy tactics. Let's go for some juicy tactics, shall we? Let's go here. f3 instantly, okay. That was a good move. Okay, so now we go. That was a mistake by me, actually. Juicy tactics was wrong. Let's go here. Oh my gosh, I need to move. I misplayed. Oh my gosh, I blundered. Oh my gosh, I blundered very badly just now. Okay, now I gotta try to flag him. Man, I just spoiled what would have been an amazing game. Oh my gosh. Very impressive time scrambling by our opponent. Yeah, not the way that we wanted to end this game, but this is what Naroditsky does. Oh my gosh, what a game. Honestly, what a game. That was insanity. I saw this mate from a distance, actually. Sorry, I had to go into cheat mode. I got too excited about the mate prospects and I didn't calculate properly. I feel like I was maybe even winning at the end, yeah. I definitely missed a win somewhere. Oh. Okay, the move was... First of all, the move was knight c3, but the move here was to play... Let's start from the end. Incredible game song. I mean, you were winning at the end, so I only won due to the clock. Knight c3, bc. And now, if rook h8, the problem is that white has this very annoying move f3. Okay, this is what you have to understand. And after bishop f3, rook e6, rook h1 is no longer checkmate. So the classic motif here is to essentially sit on white's position. You can't allow the f-pawn to move. So the correct move that I missed is bishop f3. I didn't see this at all. Bishop f3. And if rook e3, you secure the bishop with g4. And ultimately, white is going to have to give the rook up for the bishop. So rook h8 is threatened here. And there's very little that can be done about this. Knight e6 check. You can play rook d takes e6. Oh, this is beautiful. And rook h8. Amazing. Oh, and look at this line. So there's a mate threat on h1, right? And white can play rook e7 check. And after you take, suddenly it turns out the black's king doesn't have too many squares. Because if you go back to g8, you allow the trade, and white is winning. You have to go up to g6. White goes knight e5 check, king f6, hitting the rook. Rook f7, king e6, and black wins. Because now white finally has to take the bishop and drops the exchange. I mean, these lines would have been crazy. So I just missed the moment to play knight takes c3. Rook h8 was wrong, and here I should have played knight c3 bc, and either bishop takes f3 or something like bishop d5, just solidifying the pawn, and black is still better. But I panicked. I panicked, and I played knight b6, completely forgetting that the bishop can be captured. Cut me some slack. It's been 7 hours. So, yeah, here king f6 d5, and the game is over because the rook is lost. Now let's start from the start. So I'm not sure if Slamka expected queen takes d5 or d4 is his move against everything. But in any case, I can refer you to the earlier speedrun videos where this move is analyzed extensively. I'm not going to delve too deeply into the variations here. I've done this several times. D4, CD4. CD4 is a possible line. It's not an ambitious variation. Like black equalizes easily, but it is a solid option for white. It's not like black is better here. It's not like black is better here. So just to clarify what I was referring to, after knight c3, bishop g4, does anybody know what white's main move is? And I mentioned this during the game. Let's see who was paying attention. Now, this position typically arises out of the Caro-Kann e4, c6, d4, d5, the Panov attack. And you usually get this position like this. Bishop g4, cd, knight d5. What is the move? What is the move? Yeah, it's queen b3. Now bishop f3, gf, e6, queen b7. I'm going to make these moves quickly because this is all theory. And now there's queen c6 and queen takes b5. But the bottom line is that you get this endgame. And it's not like it's a forced draw. There are some imbalances, but it's a very, very hard position to win if white knows what they're doing. So that's the reason why I avoided the natural bishop g4 and decided to play e6. g6 is also possible, but again, queen b3 is a little bit unpleasant. This hits the knight, and black is not in time to stabilize the knight on d5. So that's why I decided to play e6. Okay, bishop d3, bishop e7, castles, castles, queen e2. And now the position gets very interesting. Now the position gets very interesting because I made a unconventional decision to play knight d to b4. The typical way that you are recommended to play this position with black is to complete your development as quickly as you can with b6. The problem is that if you play b6 immediately, you are allowing knight takes d5 with, I think, a very small advantage for white because queen takes d5 runs into the unpleasant bishop e4. So that is mostly why people often drop the knight back to f6 first and then play b6, and then bishop b7, and later they reestablish a knight on d5, if that kind of makes general sense. So for example, if white plays rook d1 to protect the pawn, black can play b6, white can play a3, bishop b7, and you get sort of a very typical IQP struggle. Very typical IQP struggle. I could spend like 2 hours talking about the typical plans for both sides, but it's really, really late and I'm feeling super tired. So instead, we're going to focus on the course of the game. We're going to focus on knight d to b4. What I'll say is that if white wants to avoid this kind of stuff, then it's worth playing a move like a3. And then we would have dropped the knight back to f6. You might be wondering, can black take on c3? And the answer is yes. This leads to what's called a hanging pawn structure, which is a completely different kettle of fish. I like this less than playing against the IQP, so I tend not to take on c3, but it is also possible to do that. So anyways, knight b4, bishop e4, good move. I think the only principled move. Why didn't I take on d4? Well, in this position, I was worried that our queen is going to get tossed around, and I was worried that white's control over the d file is going to hamper the development of our bishop. Also notice queen e5 runs into bishop h7, queen b6 runs into bishop e3, another tempo move, and bishop c5 walks into knight a4 with a fork. So I just evaluated this intuitively. I didn't calculate past rook d1. The computer believes that... What does the computer believe? The computer believes that... I'm going to turn it on just a second. Just a moment, my computer's frozen. There we go. So the evaluation here is plus equals. Yeah, white is better. Queen f6. White is modestly better. It's not like white is winning here, but by any means. The best move for white is to play bishop e3. Just bishop e3, completing development, and then bishop d4. White's got a big initiative. This should make sense too. This is why we decided to start with f5. Now, after f5, if the bishop had dropped all the way back to b1, now it's a different story. Now you can take on d4. This is a much improved version because the bishop is super passive. It's biting on granite. And the rook, or the queen, has a very nice spot on f6 that's safe from attacks because e4 is protected. So these are the subtle differences that make up high-level chess, right? So knight takes d4 here is too risky, but after you throw in f5, it's already possible. So I think the decision to play bishop c6 was a good one. The computer does not like bc, by the way, and believes white is clearly better here. So maybe knight takes c6 was a better move. But I kind of like this move. I like the way that we played here. I feel like this gives pretty good practical chances. A3, knight c5, queen c4, and queen b6. Defending and threatening. Bishop a6, rook e1, bishop f6. We get our pieces to good squares. White plays knight a4, which is the best move. And the computer still believes that white is much better here, actually, which is really interesting. Queen b5. But here, Slomka makes a big mistake. After the trade, the position is equal. So this makes all the difference. What should white have done? What should white have done? Who can tell me? What should white have done here? Yeah, queen c2. Now, why is black's position bad? Well, it has to do primarily with the fact that this bishop does not have a future and the fact that e6 is a very weak pawn. I think I underestimated those factors, and also that black has a very hard time making a move. White's next move is going to be knight c5 against almost anything, and black just doesn't have an active plan. So while black's position is solid, black has no way to continue improving. The engine's top move is h6. And by the way, the engine's top move for white is h3. And now a5. So you get this like pawn play because black just doesn't have any better moves. And now white's just going to continue loading up the pieces in the center. Bishop d2, rook d1, knight e5. I mean, it's pretty clear that black is in some trouble here. Too many weaknesses, not enough active pieces, and no active plan for black. So queen c2 would have been a very nasty move. And this is why, according to the engine, I should have played knight takes c6. So BC was overzealous. White is slightly better here after rook d1, but after something like knight bishop d6 or knight b4 to prevent d5, black's position remains very much tenable. But maybe this entire operation with knight b4 was not worth it. Maybe I should have just gone with the normal knight f6. So anyways, we get into the endgame. And in the endgame, we first protect the pawn on e6. Then we were able to deploy the rook b8, and bring it to b6. Then we played h6 to cover the g5 square. So all of our moves, I think, in the endgame make a lot of sense. g3, we're bringing the king up. What was the moment at which black started taking over the initiative? I think it was knight d3. I think knight d3 was a frustration move by Slomka because it allowed us to bring our bishop out, and then we reached ideal piece coordination. So a lot of people have a hard time doing nothing, but sometimes you have to. Like in a position like this, if I was playing Hikaru with white, I would literally just go rook c1, rook e1, rook c1. Black has no way to make progress here as long as the knight remains on c5. Bishop d7, by the way, runs into knight e5 check. Very important detail, and the bishop is lost. So knight d3 was a frustration move. The e5 square is not worth it. And once the bishop got to the long diagonal and we expanded, now black is already taking over the advantage. Then another tempo was wasted, and here we had the win with knight c3 and bishop f3. This is where I panicked. First, I played rook h8, hoping for knight takes c6, rook e6, knight c3, with mate on h1, and black is winning. So this was hope chess. Slomka found f3, and now more hope chess. Why did I play knight b6? So I was aiming for this position. Which isn't even that good, but I was hoping that the knight on e6 would be stranded somehow. It was just a mindless move in time pressure. And obviously, after knight f6, black can resign. Actually, here I had rook e1. Oh my gosh. Here I could have just taken and taken. So this was not even a good move. Now, of course, here, g4 is the easiest way to win, preventing g4 mate. So that's the basic idea. Slomka would have won. You were one move away. Incredibly played game. So this was a bit of a weird game. I feel like I'm running out of gas because it's really late. But the basic idea is that we got the IQP structure. In the IQP structure, you're trying to blockade the square in front of the pawn and then complete your development by fianchettoing the bishop. But we decided to go for this interesting strategy, trying to eliminate the bishop. Note that the IQP can be effectively sacrificed, but we didn't take it. Then we got this very interesting structure that I thought was a lot better than it was. Slomka played very well, but allowed the bishop to come out and allowed us to rectify the pawn structure. I was able to outplay him in the endgame, but then ultimately time pressure caused panic, and that caused the quality of play to deteriorate. So that's where I'm going to end for now, guys. Sorry, I'm exhausted. I'm going to go sleep. This was a 7-hour stream. Tons of blitz, tons of speed runs. I think this was awesome. Remember, if you like what I do, you could subscribe to my YouTube. So thanks everybody for hanging out. Okay, I can barely talk. I'm exhausted. Slomka, good game. And I'll see you guys later.